good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from, or if you are catching us on replay. This is The Awesome Journey, and I am your host, Kelle 𝘲𝘲𝘢𝘕, along with my co-host in care, Christy Howard. And the awesome journey that we are going to be talking about today is a continued discussion with one of our favorites, Mr. Pete Forcelli. Y'all, we're so excited to have him back. And for those of you who were not here the first time, and just as a friendly reminder to those that were, Pete is a retired ATF Deputy Assistant Director. He is also a former New York PD homicide detective, and now can wear the great title of #1 best-selling author of his book, The Deadly Path, which y'all need to get it. Father's Day is coming up. Great gift. This book highlights the Fast and Furious operation, along with the crappy attorneys that were involved in that, and how we armed the Mexican cartels. And kind of the irony in all of this is Brian Terry, who was involved in the Fast and Furious, for those of you that know, that is what connected Christy and I all those years ago, was an event that she did here in Scottsdale, Arizona. So, and timely, because just last week, following a data leak, which I always find so fascinating, a leak my ass, and an article that was published in a publication. I don't even want to really mention it, quite honestly, because it was so bad, but we can definitely talk about that and update today. And see what's been going on with Pete. But before we turn it over to Pete, I will turn it over to my co-host in care, Christy Howard.
Wow, to think of 12 years. Is it 12, 13, 12 years? Wow.
It's crazy.
Mine came from the coach house, getting to know all the ATF people, and living in Arizona, living in Scottsdale, not even knowing, because it was not something that was even in the media. Yep. And just learning the story, and those that know me know that there's times that God directs me to places that I have no idea why I was supposed to do it. But in the end, I had the event in Scottsdale and the event in Dallas that, brought in a lot of money for the foundation. Actually, the foundation hadn't been started when I did the first event. But having the knowledge of how corrupt and how despicable government agency, well, I'm not allowed to curse, government agencies treat their employees, their agents, and mostly whistleblowers. We've been told that when you're a whistleblower, you're coming up to the front and telling me what's going on and you will be protected. Well, not so much. That's with agencies, governments, and even in corporations. So where do we go from this? Where we go is people like Pete, who had to go through hell and back, and is still has a struggle because he's been so honest, and even with his health, did what needed to be done, and wrote this book, which is exciting because the truth always comes out. Even if you got to go through some crappy places to get that truth out. So on to you, Pete. Let's go back to, for those who weren't able to catch our first one, go back to where you started. I really would like to go into the 9/11. People tend to feel that it's not that big of a deal. That's those people that also think that the world is flat. Just to go into, and then the health issues, and then, going to Arizona for what you thought was just going to be a relaxing time.
Right. Sure. Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see you again. Yeah. Look, I started my law enforcement journey in January of 1987. I was a housing cop before Giuliani merged the three departments together. So I walked a beat like cops did back in those days. I don't know if folks still do it that often nowadays. Eventually made my way into a patrol car, and then about 5 years in, went into plain clothes, so I still did patrol duties. Then became a detective with about 7 years on the job, and then 2 years afterwards, I was asked to go into the Bronx Homicide Task Force. So I went in. I was a homicide detective back then. New York, the Bronx specifically, averaged around 600 murders a year. It's kind of crazy when you think it's one county, right? A lot of violence, a lot of drug violence. A lot of it was committed with firearms. So while I was in the homicide squad, we finally started focusing on the gangs because New York, for many years, denied they had a gang problem. And then they came to this epiphany that they realized they did, and they started to work a lot with different federal entities. And I worked mostly with ATF, worked a little bit with the FBI, quite a bit with DEA as well. And but ATF was the folks I worked with the most. So about 5 years into my time in the homicide squad, I left. Had 15 years with NYPD, so I could have did 20 and retired, but decided to jump ship and go to ATF because I found that going to federal court had a lot more impact and taking really bad people off the streets than putting them in Rikers Island where they got plea deals and usually got out rather quickly. But yeah, I came over to ATF in June of 2001. Got sworn in at the World Trade Center. 3 months. We all know what happened there. I was there that morning after the first plane hit. Stayed on site for almost 3 days. Came home on the third morning. Then spent roughly 6 years as an agent in New York. And then I promoted, because that was the only way to get out of New York, because it's a high cost of living city. Like all the agents want to be agents in the Carolinas or Florida or Texas, where it's cheaper to live. Not Austin. Austin's ridiculously expensive, I've learned. But so leaving New York was tough. The only way out was to promote. So I promoted, put in for Jacksonville, Savannah, Dallas, and Phoenix. Got picked for Phoenix. Went out there for 5 years. Mind blowing what I saw. Vastly different than New York. Just horrible. So anyway, I know we'll talk about Phoenix a lot more, but I spent 5 years there, got kind of thrown out of the state of Arizona, went to headquarters for 6 months. Then they decided it was probably a good idea to get me away from the media. So they sent me up to Canada, spent 2 years in Canada as ATF's representative to the eastern half of the country. Canadian cops are the best, love them. Good people. I don't know how my liver survived that assignment. I don't mean to stereotype. I like more beer up there, and so do I. So I spent 2 years up in Eastern Canada, mostly working with OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, Toronto Police Service, Montreal as well, Montreal Police Department. 2 years later, went back. I was put in charge of leadership training and advanced training for ATF. Spent a year there. Then went down to Miami, originally as the number 2 of that office. Assistant Special Agent in Charge. Then I was promoted to the Special Agent in Charge job. So I got to run the office, which is a great pleasure because once a month I'd have to go to either Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, sometimes both, for meetings. And
that sucks.
So the government got their 8 hours, of work, but then in the evenings I could go hang out and, met some really good folks there too. But after 3 years in Florida, I was there for Pulse, I was there for Parkland, I was there for the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting. They brought me back to headquarters and I rounded out my last years, almost 4 years as a Deputy Assistant Director. And I was in charge at the end of all training and recruiting and hiring of special agents. And finally bailed in October of 21 after sitting through a speech by Attorney General Merrick Garland, where it was very political. And I saw that his vision and my values were not in alignment and I was eligible to retire. So I decided to pull the plug and retire, which is ironic because be honest with you, I am not a very political person. In fact, I always felt that law enforcement and politics should not intertwine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
And but
it's very tough, especially when you have the higher ups that are all political.
Oh, it's politicized now.
I know. But I never saw ATF as politicized as it is now. And look, the laws that we enforced were very sensitive because there's a lot of very strong opinions on both sides of the gun control argument. So, that was more reason why our agency, above all else, and perhaps other than the FBI, should have tried to remain apolitical. But I have strong opinions about how both of them have been politicized now. And I think it's time to get back to normal, where they just enforce the law as written, do your job. And that's where it should end, just do your job.
What a novel idea. We could not agree more. And after all of that, and then let's do a little bit of a transition into, hey, Tom Smith of Gold Shields, we love you. Yeah, love them. Is the transition of into Fast and Furious, and then really what led into that, and a little bit of highlight, and then into the book.
Sure. Well, look, the most important thing to talk about Fast and Furious, I think, is to talk a little bit about before I went out to Phoenix. Because one of the things that they tried to twist around was that, hey, Pete's got a problem with lawyers. You know, when I was in New York, and this was something that actually spanned my time in NYPD and ATF, we had this program called Operation Trigger Lock. We started it. Actually started in a restaurant in Brooklyn called Two Toms. Myself, a guy named Sean O'Toole, an ATF agent named Rob Berger, and Liz Glazer, who was the chief of the Violent Crimes Unit for the U.S. Attorney's Office. We decided that if we went after some really bad people with guns and prosecuted them federally, and then brought them in and sat down with their lawyers, and we did something called the proffer, where you interviewed them. You know, they tell you everything they know, and then you got to go out. It's not like you just take what they say at face value. You then go out there and you corroborate everything. I mean, you're going out interviewing people, finding evidence, finding documents, digging up bags full of guns. Just really, really important stuff. So, I mean, I actually had an office in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I had a desk there. So, I mean, when I retired, when I left New York as an ATF agent to go to a supervisor's position in Phoenix, there were as many assistant U.S. attorneys at my party as there were agents. In fact, some of the last ones to leave were federal prosecutors. So, I mean, I had a great relationship there. So when I got out to Phoenix, what I noticed was everything that worked in New York wasn't really being allowed to happen in Phoenix. The prosecutors there, very often we would do car stops based on information that we would get from gun dealers. Like licensed gun dealers would call us and say, hey, something suspicious is going on. We would get out there. We would do what cops do all over the country. We would conduct car stops. We would ask questions. We would develop probable cause. We seized tons and tons and tons of guns, but they would always tell us, oh, we'll indict it later, or hey, take it to the county. So we were never able to take that case to the next level. So I watched this unfold for years. And then some of the other things that would happen is every now and then, because what like a lot of people don't understand is a lot of the guns that make their way to Mexico are straw purchased. And for your listeners like that might
Right,
not know
explain that.
Yeah, straw purchase is when somebody goes into a store to buy a gun, knowing full well at the time that they're buying it and filling out their form, it's not for them. It's for someone who should not have that gun. In this instance, it was folks who were trafficking guns to Mexico. So we would very often get tips from the dealers when they would see that. In fact, 90%, like I said, of our cases came from those dealers. And not just in their stores either, like at the gun shows. If they saw someone that shouldn't have been buying a gun, they would call us. If they saw someone selling guns who was not licensed, they shouldn't have been selling guns, they called us. You know, and then oftentimes, like, you know, I mean, we would do what we were supposed to do. Like I said, that nothing controversial. It was stuff that happens all over the country every single day of the year, where cops conduct car stops based on suspicion, and they build that up. I mean, in many instances, we had probable cause before the car stop even happened. So that was one, thing that affected everything. And then there was another thing that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix, and this is important to keep in mind, they came up with this ruling because in the straw purchases where something wasn't suspicious, the transaction would happen. And we would only learn about it if that gun, and the dealer wouldn't know at the time either, that gun would be traced from a crime scene, very often in Mexico. So I remember one specific instance, there was a shooting that happened in a town called Cananea, 42 miles south of the Arizona border, where 21 people were killed. 4 of them were Mexican police officers, right? So the cartel, when they were in there committing this carnage, abducted 4 other Mexican police officers, brought them in the desert, beat them, tortured them, left them for dead. The gun that was used in that, or one of the guns, was actually purchased less than 48 hours earlier, which for ATF is a big indicator. I mean, that's a quick time for that gun to leave the doors of a store to show up at a crime scene. So when we presented this case to the United States Attorney's Office, they came up with this new finding that, well, the gun is in Mexico, therefore the body of the crime is in Mexico, so we can't prosecute this case. And then that translated to every other case where the gun was recovered in Mexico, when in reality, you're charging them with lying on a form because they're checking a box that they're saying they're buying the gun for themselves when they're not, they're lying. And we would have the form in hand. They didn't want to hear it. But I watched this happen for years. And I watched my agents go out there and do everything the right way. And look, I'm not saying we never made mistakes, but they were minor mistakes. Right. Nothing that should have killed the case. So, you know, as a supervisor, I'm saying, wait a minute. It's sad to see my agents doing things and always hitting a wall. Like they're never going to make it to their full potential, not because of them, but because of obstacles that were thrown down by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then I would also see them hire new prosecutors from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office who would come over like just invigorated, like, wow, we're federal prosecutors now. We're going to go out there and do some good. And you would watch these really good people, right, who were experienced attorneys just get beaten down. So, but again, this happened for roughly 3 years that I was there. And then my group's mission changed Phoenix began to lead the United States in home invasions and kidnappings, which was not a distinction that the city liked. And we were second in this hemisphere behind Mexico City, which is much, much bigger population-wise than Phoenix. So my group was tasked with addressing the home invasion surge with Phoenix's home invasion and kidnapping enforcement unit. So we were kind of meshed in with them, which was great because that's the kind of work that I did in New York for the most part. So a new group was stood up to deal with the Mexico-bound firearms trafficking. Most of them were brought in from other parts of the country, and that was Phoenix Group 7. So what happened was time went on. We weren't aware of what was happening, but as roughly I'd say maybe 8 months or so into it, we started getting calls from the same dealers who used to call us saying, hey, what's going on with this new group? Because we're calling them and we're getting gun traces. So because when we would seize the guns as they left store, there's no need to trace them. We knew where they came from. So the dealers would be getting calls from folks in Martinsburg, West Virginia, who were at ATF's tracing center saying, hey, your gun was recovered in Mexico. We want to trace it. And they couldn't fathom why, because in their mind, as soon as that gun left the gun store, ATF agents weren't going to be interdicting it. So while that's starting to get bubble over, so to speak, we start hearing talk about them walking guns. And then within just a few days, Brian Terry gets killed in December, patrolling the desert, as we know, looking for drug bandits, and he's killed. And all of a sudden, like the shroud of secrecy starts to descend on Phoenix. Yeah. Now, all of a sudden, an agent in that group, a guy named John Dodson, contacts Senator Grassley's office and blows the whistle. None of us in my group knew what was happening, nor in the other groups that were co-located.
Was John, and again, the characters, was John in Phoenix?
John was in that group. John was in Phoenix 7. He was one of the newer agents. And when I say newer, I mean newer to Phoenix. They constructed that entire group out of mostly folks that came out from other parts of the country when they stood that group up. And then two agents that were there was a girl named Hope McAllister and Tanya English. They were Phoenix before that. So Hope knew the U.S. Attorney's office there. She knew how they operated. And she was the case agent on Operation Fast and Furious. So, but when John blew the whistle, I attend the supervisors meeting, and I'd been to meetings once a week, and you'd hear these crazy numbers in this case, but we always thought they were historical numbers as they were finding documents. We didn't realize that they were letting guns right off into the sunset. So John blows the whistle, and I'm at a subsequent meeting where Bill Newell, who was the agent in charge of the Phoenix Field Division, comes back and says, hey, the U.S. Attorney's Office is really pissed at John Dodson. My suggestion is stay away from him because don't be surprised if he finds himself indicted. So now I'm sitting there in this meeting with all the other supervisors and, the ones from Albuquerque and Tucson, the ones that weren't located in Phoenix are dialed in, and my blood's boiling. And I'm like, wait a minute. We presented dozens and dozens and dozens of cases involving a ton of firearms traffickers and one grenade trafficker, by the way, that the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't prosecute. And now there's even like rumblings that they would possibly indict John Dodson. So I went home that night. I was pissed off. And I had a conversation with my wife and told her what was going on. And I didn't vent about work to my wife or kids much. I found it healthier to not do that. And my wife's response was, man, you better, if you don't do the right thing, you're not the guy I married. So the following morning, I called Senator Grassley's office. And I remember clear as a bell, a guy named Brian Downey answered the phone. And I said, listen, Brian, my name's Pete Forcelli. I'm a supervisor for ATF in Phoenix. I know that John Dodson's contacted your office. And I know that he told you guns were walking and that Eric Holder and the DOJ and ATF has told you that John is a liar and that we don't walk guns. Well, I'm here to tell you that John's not lying and ATF walk guns. And the weird thing is, up until that point, I don't know that I ever met John Dodson. I mean, I might have been on the range with him once or twice, but I don't know that I had a conversation with him that was beyond hello and goodbye. But I just thought it was appalling that here, for years, we were trying to do the right thing and stem the flow of firearms being trafficked into Mexico and put bad people in jail, and they wouldn't do their jobs. And lo and behold, now they're going to talk about potentially indicting a guy who stepped up and told the truth. Like, to me, it was like a bridge way, way, way too far.
Yeah. And that's what still happens, right? I mean, and that's what happens with you. Yeah. I mean, yes. Oh, it's today, though, it feels it's so much more brazen. Like they're just so in your face with it. Like this person told the truth and they went out and they ruined this human being in a matter of moments. But in this situation, and because we talk about this a lot with other guests too, there is nothing worse. One, I don't think is, and you being a supervisor and seeing your team working their tails off and trying to do good and make a difference, and then having the people above them go, let it go. How that has to impact morale. I mean, your personal, emotional, mental state, all the things. But then to see someone who's been the boots on the ground telling the truth, and then he's getting completely isolated and ostracized, and you're being told, stay away from this guy.
Yeah, and he was telling the truth. But it's funny because you mentioned the coach house earlier. The day that I spoke to Grassley's staff, that night I went and met some very good friend of mine, Tommy Mangan, and some others from ATF at the coach house. And it's
Tommy,
weird that evening,
Tommy can spin crap into gold.
I love that guy. He's an amazing human being. He's a good dude. He had my back through some tough times. But it was weird because that very evening, there was an agent sitting there that I had never met before. I had heard of him. I had conversations about him. The guy was a legend in ATF, guy named Jay Dobbins. Now, I had never met Jay. And Tommy says, hey, that's Jay Dobbins over there. So Tommy introduces me. And first Jay's like, who are you? Yeah, because I know he was going through some tough times as well. And he had blown the whistle on some other stuff and was retaliated against. So I tell Tommy, literally in this conversation, hey, man, I contacted Grassley's office. And Jay just shakes his head. He's like, dude, they're going to come after you. And I'm like, nah, I think I'll be okay. There's a lot going on. Brian Terry was dead at this point. I mean, I thought it was the right thing to do. I didn't think people would push back that hard. And he's like, no, brother, I'm telling you, they're going to. And Jay was right. But it's ironic. You mentioned the coach house earlier. And here's Jay, who's burned his house to the ground. I mean, Jesus.
The coach house is
this is how it all started, was because I was a regular. I lived down the street from the place. And anybody who knows Scottsdale knows Coach House. It's one of the oldest bars. And that's how I got to know you and Box and Pat Kelly and everybody, but understanding the dynamics of the ATF and the agents and all the crap that you all telling the truth and standing in the truth. I mean, we've had Jay on 2 times, 3 times. I can't remember. He's come out from underground and been on the show with us. However, people, when you got the higher ups, Holder, Newell, all those people, they don't want the truth to come out because they're so dirty. And as Kelly said, now it's so in your face, like, we're dirty, but you can't do anything for us because we're going to destroy anybody that's going to try to bring out the truth, because we're going to have those people go, well, we really like them because we don't like those people. And you all are just trying to do what's right and protect us. And people are not getting this. This is our first responders, our veteran people are not getting this. And it breaks my heart because I've seen you, Jay, so many people John Dodson's, whose lives have been exploded.
Terribly.
I always remember this, how you shared about having to sell your watches, having a garage sale to pay your mortgages. I know that John Dodson is, I don't know where, I know his life got blown up. Jay's life was blown up.
Well, Jay's house was almost burned to the ground, and then they tried to frame him for burning.
And then the ATF said that he did it.
Right. And some of the same players, by the way, and one of them was a sinister guy named 𝘕𝘠𝘠. He was the number 2 of that side of the Phoenix Field Division. I mean, because look, the way I came from the NYPD, when someone hurts one of ours, we're going to go there in numbers to show the community, hey, we're not going to tolerate this. So when I heard that Jay's house had burned, and the reason I found out about it is I used to see Tommy Mangan every day in the office. So I come in, we grab.
I saw him every day at the coach house.
I caught him before that. So, but I love Tommy. So what happened is I didn't see him. So I was like, is Tommy sick? I didn't know what was going on. So I called Tommy. I'm like, hey, Tommy, what's going on, brother? Where are you? And he's like, hey, I'm down in Tucson. I said, okay, you're on vacation? He goes, no, Jay's house got burned. And I was like, what? No one told us, and that's unheard of. So, okay, so I go upstairs because our offices were on the 6th floor. The SAC's office was on the 9th floor. So I go up to the 9th floor and I go into the special agent in charge's office, Bill Newell. I'm like, hey, Bill, I heard Jay's house was firebombed. we need to send my group down there. Can we help? And what I was told by Bill is like, no, I spoke to 𝘕𝘢𝘸𝘕, and George said it's just minor scorching, nothing to worry about. They got it under control. So I was like, are you sure? So I didn't know. I never knew the degree of damage to Jay's house. So anyway, right.
And his family was in the house.
Yes, his family, and he was gone. He was out of town.
Yes, I know that. Well, I didn't know that then, obviously, but I took it at face value. Why would they lie? I mean, and this is really appalling. So anyway, while this whole Fast and Furious mess is going on, one day I see Jay on Fox News, and I see pictures of his house. I'm like, minor scorching. That freaking thing was burned to the ground. And then the worst part was that guy, 𝘕𝘢𝘸𝘕, what I had learned, and I learned because I got subpoenaed to testify in Jay's trial, George restricted access to that case so that he was the person who was documenting all the reports. Basically, what him and another underling in Tucson were doing was trying to frame Jay for burning his own house down. I mean, absolutely appalling. That's why I say, like, you know, in many ways, what I went through sucked. Yes, I had to pawn watches, a bunch of them, to pay the mortgage 1 month.
You can't go apples to apples, because what you went through was as bad as Jay. It's just as appalling crap.
I got off easy compared to Jay Dobbins and compared to some other whistleblowers in other parts of federal government who I've met, because I've met a lot of them who have gone, they've been bankrupted. Their marriages don't last. You know, I mean, they lose their reputations, their profession. I was lucky that I had a couple of people in ATF, and I'll name them, Tom Brandon, Tom Atterbury, who said, hey, Pete, as long as you're telling the truth, we have your back. And they kept their word. And look, I talk a lot, you know, now that I'm retired, about leadership, and I try to do the right thing as a leader in blowing the whistle. But I think it's also important to recognize that those guys, because it wasn't politically correct to have Pete's back then.
That's right.
Those guys had my back. In fact, Tom Brandon, when I told him I got subpoenaed, reached into his pocket and he handed me a St. Michael's challenge coin. Tom was a very, very religious guy. Like he still is. I haven't spoken to Tom that recently. And he said, Pete, as long as you're telling the truth, I have your back. Gives me the key. He goes, this will give you some strength. He goes, now run to the truth. And he kept his word. And look, him and Tom Atterbury couldn't really fight for me because they weren't in Phoenix for the stuff that I witnessed in the previous 3 years, including that grenade case, which was as appalling as Fast and Furious.
And nobody's ever heard about that one.
Oh, they buried that one. We can talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so I mean, but those guys kept their word, and I think that that's important to recognize that, because you know, when next time somebody steps up, instead of bosses do what they normally do, which is, you know, let's bury this guy because it's politically expedient to do that. Tom gave me the room to fight for myself, because again, they didn't know what was going on in Phoenix. They couldn't defend me because they didn't have the evidence to do that. But I was slugging it out with DOJ, with the OIG, with the Democrat side of Congress, because they were mad because they thought I was trying to point fingers at Obama. When what I was truly saying is, hey man, there's a problem here. I didn't give a shit who was president or anything. Let's fix the problem.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, yeah, you also have a very strong wife.
Oh yeah, no, she's a Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx, man. She's not going to take any good.
Oh yeah, don't mess with her. I mean, or her family.
But as you said, some people's marriages were, you know, it hurts totally marriages, and we've had conversations with a lot of our first responders and our veterans. When you marry, you know, as you said, when you'd go home, you wouldn't really share much, because that's, you know. And that's where PTSD comes in and all that stuff. To have a spouse and family members are like, I'm standing by you and you go after them. You do the right thing. Yeah, and look, that's what's cool.
It turned into a 4-year fight too. I mean, my name wasn't fully officially cleared. It took 4 years, which sucked. But yeah, I mean, look, we didn't go bankrupt. We almost did, but we came pretty close to being penniless. Again, if I had my grandfather's rifle, 3 watches that I loved. I mean, they were collector's items that I, you know, acquired over many, many years. And then, you know, I remember one day in my driveway trying to sell power tools. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite as humbling as when you got a mortgage payment coming and you have tools that you had, you know, some nice power tools and whatnot, and you're trying to sell them in your driveway for far less than they're worth because you got to pay the mortgage. And you got people that are trying to talk you down from your already like really low price to go lower. And you're like, well, do I really want to sell this $200 tool for like, you know, $15? And it's like, well, I kind of have to at this point because I need whatever pennies I can scrape together to make that next mortgage payment. So, but no, I own. Oh,
sorry. I was just going to say, and then just knowing that you're doing it because you're telling the truth.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that part is so hard to wrap your brain around of, and for me, with all of the energy and time that is put in with a Jay Dobbins and way too many others, the energy and the planning, plotting to destroy these people. And that to me is always kind of a red flag. As soon as they, whoever y'all want to say they are, start pushing someone out, it's always like, they must be very close to the truth, or they know something. And I want to remind everyone too, who, even if you're in Phoenix or not in Phoenix, I've lived here a long time. I'm still in the Scottsdale area, but Christy was here at the time. This was not talked about on the news. And I was married to someone in law enforcement, and have a lot of friends in law enforcement. It was so quiet here that it was shocking. The only reason I knew as much as I did was because of my connections and for meeting Christy and going to the Brian Terry event. But even that did get some local publicity, but it was, it went quiet very quickly. And now, even with, the recent data leak, which I find fascinating, it's so many years later that people, and there's just no context to anything anymore. And it's so sad that the truth is such a battle. And then Christy and I, said this, I know last time with you and so many of our other guests, is your strength and your belief in setting firm in the truth and saying, oh no, I am not giving up. You come at me all you want, but I will I will stay in my truth. And God bless you for doing that, because, and like you said, 4 years, and for people to think about that for a minute, of all of this, you were in a decent position, had a decent wage, all of the things, and then to be selling your tools in your front yard, how quickly that happened in retrospect, or just, putting a timeline kind of into it, which is just freaking terrifying.
Well, Kelly, I'll tell you something. Like, I was in another group. I wasn't in that group. I didn't see what was happening firsthand. I could have pretended nothing happened. And look, you're right. If Brian Terry didn't die, no one might have ever even found out about the scandal. Just like the grenade case. No one was killed on this side of the border with those grenades. Hundreds of grenades, by the way, right? Same prosecutor. We can get into that story later if you want. But look, the reality is this. I learned my values as a law enforcement officer in New York, where you don't take, pardon my language, shit from anybody. And I worked with some guys. When I was a new detective, I was in the squad with guys who were around in the Serpico days. I mean, they'd been through all kinds of
that's
stuff.
cool.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I learned from these guys. I love these people. And the other thing is, so I mean, I felt like I owed them. They took the time to teach me this job. They took the time to turn me into an investigator. Like, I didn't want to let them down. The other thing is, look, I lost friends in the line of duty. A lot of them, 7 on 9/11 alone. But I was in the car with Hector Fontanez when he took his last breath. He got shot in the chest on Gun Hill Road by some drug dealer. So I mean, I've seen sacrifice. I'm like, wait, these people have given their all. Who the hell would I be to give anything less? So I mean, that's all of those things all factored in, and the fact that they were willing to throw a guy who, again, I didn't know. And truthfully, what I'd heard about John, I really didn't care for. I heard John was kind of like one of those wise asses, and, a little bit of drama around John sometimes. Just not my kind of guy. But still, I'm not going to let a guy get thrown under the bus when he's telling the truth about something like that. But and look, one of the other things that I found really appalling and that helped push me to write the book, there were 2 different things. One is, towards the end of my career at ATF, I'd run into agents from other parts of the country because I was the head of training. So I'd be down at the academy a lot. And every now and then I'd get people who were even on the job during Fast and Furious, but somewhere else in the country.
You just went mute.
What really happened there? Like, what happened?
Okay.
And so I would try to tell them, and it was like, hey, we don't really talk about that. So I had like people from way up on high saying, we don't discuss Fast and Furious. Well, in the military, when something bad happens, more often than not, they'll come up with some after action, training or something, so that people don't make those same mistakes again. We weren't allowed to do that, and I thought that was BS, to be honest with you. And then the other thing is, I had met Josephine Terry when I testified on June 15, 2011. And I was heartbroken. Like, that's probably why I was so heated. If you watch the testimony, I was not blunt. Because I watched this woman like in sorrow talking about what she was going through. And her and her family, look, they knew they weren't getting Brian back. They knew that. but they wanted answers, right? So here's this hero Border Patrol agent who dies valiantly in the desert, right? And his family acknowledges he's gone. We understand that, but we want to know why.
Yeah.
They were never treated with even a shred of decency and respect and told why. So look, I know my book didn't give them all the answers that they want. It doesn't have, I don't have all the answers, but they need to know something.
They're still wanting.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is with their foundation, they're turning around and paying it forward in Brian's name.
Yes.
You know,
God bless them.
it just, but they don't. No family needs to go through what the Terrys have had to go through.
Right.
Not okay.
But I mean, let's go back to that other case. Because again, had Brian not been killed, you might not have ever heard of Fast and Furious. That was 2000.
That's right.
2,000 plus firearms, right? God knows how many people were killed in Mexico with them. I know of a helicopter full of Mexican, I'm not sure if it was soldiers or cops, that was downed with a 50 caliber rifle that was trafficked as part of that case. But let's talk about the Jean-Baptiste Quinckery grenade case. Here's a guy who came on our radar because he was buying a lot of inert grenades, right? They're not illegal to have anywhere in the United States. It's inert. It's not a grenade. You've seen them probably. People use them as paperweights. People make those stupid, I've seen lamps made out of them. I've seen people put them as like ornaments on a trailer hitch on that little nub in the back. So anyway, we find out that this guy, Jean-Baptiste Quinckery, is amassing these grenades, inert grenades, from not just driving around Arizona, which is how we found out again from dealers, right? That, hey, something suspicious. The dealers are such bad people, sarcastically when I said it. So, but anyway, we find out that he's ordering them from other parts of the country too, upstate New York, Chicago. So then we start looking at his border crossings, and this guy's crossing the border all the time. So my agents in Yuma start investigating him. So they come to this conclusion that, look, we think he's making these things into live grenades. We don't know if he's making them in Yuma and selling them locally. More likely, he's making them in Mexico, selling them in Mexico. So anyway, we're building a case. Eventually, this guy gets stopped crossing the U.S.-Mexico border at the San Luis port of entry, going into Mexico, when CBP x-rays his vehicle. And when they x-ray his vehicle, they find 114 disassembled hand grenades in his tires.
Wow.
So, yeah, but they don't know if they're live or not live. So what do? They seal the port off. They call in the bomb squad. And then the bomb squad has to do a render safe procedure, which means ripping the tires apart. So, I mean, this is not something that's done quietly. This is a big spectacle at this point. So this guy gets taken into custody. The U.S. Attorney's Office decides, well, we don't want to arrest him. Let him go. Have him come back tomorrow and interview him. So I'm in Phoenix when this happens.
Let's just trust him. He'll come back.
Well,
Right.
Well, he did, but it gets worse. It gets a lot worse. So anyway, I'm in Phoenix when this happens. My boss is in Albuquerque. He calls me and says, hey, you need to get your ass down to Yuma. This guy's probably going to come back tomorrow. If he doesn't, go find him, and you need to interview him. So this guy comes in the next day. We're at the ICE office because we didn't have an office in Yuma. We were kind of just squatting. And he comes in and he confesses that, I've been making grenades for the Sinaloa cartel. I've been doing it for years. He was married to the Mazatlan police chief's daughter. So he's a white American married to a Mexican national. He had a house down there in Mazatlan. So, and then he admits, well, I take the AK-47 variant rifles, which are semi-automatic rifles that are purchased in the United States by straw purchasers, and I convert them to machine guns. Oh, and by the way, I do the same thing with the AR-15s, right, which are also semi-automatic civilian versions of a rifle. So we called the U.S. attorney, a guy named Emory Hurley, back, tell him exactly what this guy confessed to. And Emory's response is, Pete, at trial, he can always say that this confession was coerced. And, but these are inert grenades. He can always say he's making those, and I'm going to quote him, hilarious complaint department, take a number of grenades. I don't think there's enough. Let him go. So I called the Southern District of New York, which was working on a case against the Sinaloa cartel to see if there's any way they can pull that case into their overall conspiracy. Right. And they're starting. Now, this is in New York, mind you. They're like, well, is there any wire transfers through a bank here in New York? No, not that we can identify. Any parts, because if you can find any nuance to our district, we'll take it, right? So in Arizona, where it's happening, they couldn't care less. So anyway, I tell Emory, look, I have a problem with letting this guy go. Well, we need a little bit more. So for the first time in my career, and as a homicide detective, you live and die in the interview room. I never did an interview that ended and then said, hey, buddy, can we talk again? So for the first time in my at this point, like 26, 27-year career, bring this guy back in. What go over everything again. So he reemphasizes everything that he told us, and then, but now he has an epiphany. There's one thing I forgot. Tell us. I take thumb drives from Mexico into the U.S. It's like if a cartel guy in Mexico wants stuff carried out, like, what do you mean stuff? Well, money moved or someone needs to get taken care of or whatever. I'll bring, by take care of, I'm assuming that means kidnapped or killed. That's what he assumed as well. So he would take these thumb drives across the border. So we call 𝘓𝘬𝘧𝘍𝘬 back, and his response is, Pete, I still don't like it. This can get thrown out. We'll consider indicting him in a couple of weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks, let him go. So we had to let this guy walk out the door of this office. Now, at this point, this guy's like, wait a minute, time out. When they shut down the port, the plaza bosses know what's happening. They know that you have me in custody. So if you don't arrest me,
Right.
they're gonna be wondering why. You guys need to lock me up. So,
Yes,
Emery
please.
wouldn't budge. But anyway, we're forced to watch this guy leave because without a federal prosecutor, there was sometimes we could take some of the gun cases to the state if there was an underlying state charge. With this, there was none. The only charge was violating the Arms Export Control Act, which this guy violated. And without federal prosecutors, we couldn't keep him. So anyway, 2 weeks passes. We have that meeting. We're told, well, we'll still think about it. I'm still communicating with New York, who's still trying to find a way to take it. Time passes. All of a sudden, that same prosecutor just stops taking our calls, stops taking our emails. And so anyway, he's the same prosecutor who's the lead prosecutor on Operation Fast and Furious. So anyway, fast forward, we're now working with SDNY. We're working with Mexico. We're still trying to get Emery to answer his phone or to answer his emails. We finally get enough where Mexico can hit his grenade mill, which was in Culiacan. When ATF shows up there with Mexican federal assets, the local police try to push them off the site. And ATF's like, no, we ain't moving. Right? So my friend Carlos Quinino, who you may or may not have met, Carlos is also an Arizona guy. He calls the Attorney General of Mexico, who he knew from when he was assigned in Mexico, and says, hey, we need backup. So they finally send a bunch of assets there. They execute this warrant, and Jean-Baptiste Quigney's mill, he gets arrested down there finally and actually kept in custody. And his grenade mill had enough components on hand to make between 800 and 1,000 hand grenades. Now, this is over a year after that stop at the border. They also found the machinery that he used to make the AK-47s into fully automatic rifles. Same with the, with both platforms, which begs the question: in that year plus that we were not allowed to keep him in custody, how many grenades did he make for the Sinaloa cartel? How many people are dead because this idiot prosecutor wouldn't do his job, right? And then to make matters worse, we find out that not only was he doing this, he was basically had a school where he was teaching other people how to make the grenades with his very exclusive use.
Oh, super.
And how to turn the rifles into machine guns.
Wonderful.
So here, the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona refused to prosecute a guy who was in essence the armorer to the Sinaloa cartel, despite confessions and overwhelming evidence for over a year. So this was also one of the things that I talked to Congress about when I first was deposed by them. But ironically, that never made it out because it was very inconvenient for people in politics to find out not only were they allowing guns to be trafficked into Mexico, they were allowing grenades to be trafficked in manufacturing.
So it really just shows, especially when you're in Congress and you're giving all the facts, it's always political. It always has to do with, what's going up at the high, and it doesn't matter what could, the fatalities like Brian. And I always forget his name. I believe he was an ICE agent out of Texas.
𝘓𝘕𝘓𝘓. But see, I got to be honest, because I try to be honest all the time. He was not killed with a Fast and Furious gun.
Oh, he wasn't? Okay.
No, he was killed with a gun that was trafficked in another case that was it was similar where the prosecutors were dragging their heels and not prosecuting somebody fast enough, so that gun managed to get bought by someone who should have been in jail. But it wasn't a gun that was part of the Fast and Furious case, which is called Jacob Chambers et al. And others. The nickname was given to the case because all the defendants in that case drove these souped up little Japanese cars like in the Fast and Furious movies. But I mean, look, it doesn't give anybody a pass either. No. In that case, one straw purchaser alone bought approximately 800 firearms before the U.S. Attorney's Office thought it was worth indicting the guy. And like at one point, 800, that's one guy. So at one point, but here's the thing that's even more messed up. Right now, so you have these dealers, like I told you before, that started to push back. Some of them, when they found out what was going on, met with ATF and federal prosecutors and said, "Hey, man, we're not selling to these straw purchasers anymore. We're done. We're out." Right? Because their guns are getting traced to Mexico.
I think the Scottsdale Gun Club was one of them.
Wolf Trading Company, Scottsdale Gun. There's a handful of them.
Yeah.
So them and their lawyers have called a meeting with ATF and the Phoenix U.S. Attorney's Office to say, "We're done. We're not doing this anymore. We were under the impression that you guys were doing these interdictions like those other guys did." Right? So they're told, no, you don't understand. We're doing something different. Keep selling. So ATF and federal prosecutors, right? So the people who regulate them and the people who are in a position to prosecute people are telling them to keep selling guns. Well, right now there's a big lawsuit going on where the government of Mexico is suing Arizona gun dealers for sending guns to Mexico. And they weren't sending the guns to Mexico. It's just so it's astounding to me what's going on. So the politics is still happening today.
Oh, huge. We were talking about that before we came on, because that article that was released, and now the suing of the gun distributors and manufacturers, but they're also the spin on how they're saying things is like part of this. In that article, they said was to blame for the fentanyl traffic that's coming in, and I was just like, are you kidding? But then it's like, no, I'm not surprised, but it's so shocking at how twisted it is. But also, being an Arizonan, it totally ticks me off for so many freaking reasons. But it also makes you go, this person who had that type of power, I mean, because you were delivering him a case. Like, I mean, how much more do you need?
He had a bow on him, and he's like, "Hey, surprise! I'm your
There's
person."
a martini on the side to boot, and then for him to be like blowing it off. But that stuff, what I don't think people think about, that comes from a lot higher than that person. They're being motivated by other places, and it's deep. Like, it doesn't go.
Here's the problem.
The deep state.
Here's the problem. Each U.S. attorney's office around the country is different. They're all run by presidential appointees. They all get to come up with their own priorities for their district. Arizona is still the worst U.S. attorney's office in the country, and I'm not just saying that because I feel that way.
I'm not offended.
I've spoken to people that are still in ATF in Arizona. I've spoken to people in ATF in headquarters who've told me that.
So weird.
There's this thing in federal government called the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, where agents anonymously puts information about their leadership and whatnot. The Phoenix office is dead last in all of the ATF offices in the country, which is unfortunate, like I say, because the agents want to go there and do the job. Yes. Somebody's handcuffing them. But look, Phoenix is not the only U.S. attorney's office that sucks. I've been to Chicago, right? And I've had agents in Chicago tell me the same thing. Look at the bloodshed that's happening in Chicago, where youth are killing other youth like it's going out of style. The U.S. attorney's office in the District of Columbia is a shit show. The U.S. attorney's office in Baltimore right now is not doing their job. But you can go to other districts where they're killing it. So I don't want to paint all of the Department of Justice or all U.S. Attorney's Office with a broad brush, because that would really not be fair, because in some parts of the country, they're killing it. But here's the thing. If you're not going to go after the low-hanging fruit, like we did in New York, again, 600 murders a year was reduced to 200 because we were putting the right people in jail. And when I say we, I mean the NYPD and the prosecutors. It wasn't Pete Forcelli doing it. I was passing information on to homicide squads and whatnot. So, but I mean, if in Arizona, if we were allowed to take some of those straw purchasers and flip them and say, who are you working for? And then go after those other folks and just keep moving up and up the chain. I'm not going to say that we would have stopped the flow of firearms into Mexico, because the cartels, look, when we would build we would build a better mousetrap. They'll build a better mouse. So, I mean, it's a cat and mouse game. But you're not even making progress when you're just walking away from low-hanging fruit because you think it's beneath you. And that's what was happening. In fact,
well, there's no, and now I'm going to use New York, and Chicago. I lived in both places, and those two are places I'd be afraid to even go. Ooh. You can do a crime, not a big deal. Not a big deal.
Federally, if you get caught breaking federal law in the Bronx, which is in the Southern District of New York, watch out, because they still don't play. But, we talked before about how we built those cases with proffers.
Yeah.
Nobody watches C-SPAN, folks. I get it. But my testimony is still on C-SPAN. So during the hearing, most of the talking points, first in the deposition, the people that were there asked good questions. because there's no politicians there, there's no cameras. So they really like 6-8 hours of just peeling the layers of the onion apart. By the time the hearing happened on Capitol Hill, it became gun control, right? Bury Obama, all this like so. But there were a few people that asked good questions, and one of them was 𝘱𝘗𝘕, who was a former federal prosecutor. So he was pissed off because he's like, Agent Forcelli, you telling me that they don't let you use proffers, which is what I mentioned before, like that interview with the defendant and their bad guy. So when 𝘱𝘗𝘕 went off the rails about that at the hearing, Eric Holder took note. And Eric Holder sent out a letter to all U.S. attorneys' offices around the country saying, from this point forward, all gun arrests to defendants will be proffered. Right? So, okay. And a bit of cover your ass, not giving Eric Holder any credit for anything. That should have been happening. And when it wasn't happening, you're the boss. Your job is to go fix it. So anyway, no shit. One of the chiefs of the U.S. Attorney's Office, a guy named _𝘓𝘍𝑒𝘓, and that's one of my book. I name names, man, because I can prove everything that's in that book. That book is nothing in that book that's rumor. Or it's stuff that I have documentation or had documentation or witnesses to corroborate. None of it's political. It's all facts. So anyway, _𝘓𝘓 calls me, goes, we need to have a meeting. Okay, whatever, Howard. He comes over. By this time, I'm already getting my teeth kicked in, so it's kind of whatever. So he's like, Pete, our office's position. Which when they said our office's position, that meant bend over, here it comes. So our office's position is that a definition of a proffer is it's a letter that we receive from a defense attorney saying their client wants to speak. And when we receive those letters, our office's position that we are bound to only ask about what's in the 4 corners of the document. That's pretty close to an actual quote as I can get, which is bullshit. It's a proffer is when you sit down with somebody and you talk to them about everything they know, everything they saw, and then also everything they did. And the reason for that is when they're on the witness stand testifying against their fellow criminals, right? Their fellow criminals know what they've done. So you don't want something to like, all of a sudden he talks about all the shit he saw, but doesn't mention what he's been involved in. And then somebody else takes the stand and then impeaches your witness by saying he's a bag of crap and talks about all the things that he did that this guy didn't make you aware of. So, I mean, we used to turn these people inside out when we proffered them. I mean, even fights they got in freaking high school, fist fights, we wanted to know about it. I mean, the fact that they would even come up with this the new definition of a proffer goes to show you how insultingly lazy that office was. And like I said, from what I'm hearing, they have not gotten much better.
Yeah, I haven't heard that it's gotten much better. And just and we were saying this again before, because I'm like, in my logical brain, it's like, why are we feeding a problem? Like we're feeding the guns, but there's no, you're feeding the criminal. And this made me think this morning when I was reading that article again, is it's like San Francisco saying now they're spending tax dollars to give alcoholics that are homeless, booze. It's the same. You're just making the problem worse. And it's like common sense tells you to do like what y'all were doing in New York, like trying to stop the problem before it becomes a problem. Like it is such basic common sense. And for me, following this story over this many years and how it is, changed, silenced, all the things, it's just kind of like, this happens all the time and where it is now. And it's awful how it is here in Arizona. And it pisses me off as a resident of Arizona, how despicable that this has been. And I'm being kind because I have much bigger words that I would like to use my own self. And I'm so grateful for people like you, like I said, for standing up, and for people who come here, which is a shame. And you touched on this earlier too, who want to do a good job and are like, I want to get my hands on that department because I could make some changes, but they're getting absolutely annihilated. So nobody's staying or is able to do anything because they're handcuffed, which is of course also criminal. But I kind of wanted to go on a point that we were talking about, being isolated and being removed and being told like, don't stay. Because we've talked about this with other guests also, is when you are isolated, because there's actually nothing worse on a department to be isolated from your peer group, your brotherhood, if you will, is what advice would you have for them because of the pressure of what comes down on them if they stand for the truth?
Well, look, some of the things I'll say is, like I said, I had some allies, which not every whistleblower has. So I came out of this intact because of that. but I think it's important. Like one of the reasons I had those allies is I stuck to the truth. At no point did I make any of this personal, right? It wasn't me versus the agents in that case. It wasn't me versus people at the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's like, hey, me versus these problems. One is you don't walk guns, right? You don't jeopardize public safety ever, even to make a case, right? And then the other thing is, hey, if you're a prosecutor, do your damn job and prosecute. And I get it that sometimes prosecutors, especially federal prosecutors, a lot of people don't realize it's different than when like a local cop brings an arrest to a district attorney's office. Most district attorney's offices are going to take those charges. I mean, 90% of the time. Federally, it's different. Now, in New York, I never was told no, never. There were times where, hey, Pete, we want a little bit more. We'll take the case, but we want you to do A through F or whatever. In Phoenix, it was not uncommon to be told, nah, pass. So, I mean, that needed to be fixed. And again, it wasn't fixed. So that's number one. Number two is don't make it personal.
How did you do that? That's my question.
Look,
how do you seriously not take it personal?
Yeah.
Truthfully, 𝘍𝘀 𝘋𝘕𝘀, the lead case agent in Fast and Furious, was my friend. We went through the academy together. We drank beer together. She's not a bad person. Very, very misguided. She had one case right before that was a big case involving an actual dirty gun dealer that wasn't prosecuted. So maybe, and I don't justify it because you don't let guns walk. Then you take it to the state like we did. Maybe if they would have prosecuted her cases when she brought them, they were done the right way. Maybe she wouldn't have went down this stupid path. Right? Bill Newell. Bill Newell is one of the nicest human beings I ever worked for. Period. He was also grossly incompetent because he was inexperienced. Right? So I mean, doesn't excuse it. You know, you want to promote into a position of leadership. Be ready to lead or don't promote. You know, and look, I don't know if you'll agree with me or don't agree with me. So, but anyway, with the politics end, he said, "What do you do?" I had the Democrat folks trying to pull me in one direction. We need to talk about gun control. No, that's not the problem here. It's criminal control. Right. And then you had other people trying to tell me what I was supposed to say to make it look like it came the White House down rather than Phoenix up, which is what happened. It came Phoenix up. Did Obama hold anybody accountable? No. Were they honest with the American people? No. But they didn't cause this to happen. They certainly did some things along the way to help it benefit them, like implementing Demand Letter 3, right? Because they saw an opportunity, never let a crisis go to waste, so to speak. So, I mean, that's the other thing. Don't let some politician pull you into a corner. And you see that happen a lot with whistleblowers, right? You'll see them. In fact, you saw it today. There was a press conference today where you had some of the Capitol Police people. I don't care what you think of them. I personally don't care for them. Standing there at a press conference like, hey, man, shut the hell up and just get back to work. So, I mean, don't get political. Don't make it personal. And the other thing is go back to work. Like some of the other whistleblowers, even in Fast and Furious, they kept poking the bear. Go back to work. Do your job. Be as good as you can be because you know they're going to come at you. They're going to try to make you look incompetent or retroactively incompetent. Don't give them any ammo. You know what I mean? So, so I think trying to just stick to those things and then stick into the truth. Don't embellish. Don't guess. Stick with the facts, stuff that you can back up. Because when you start going down those other paths, then you're giving people ammunition to rip you apart. And look, I'm not going to lie. Because once I blew the whistle, there were some people in ATF like, oh, this guy's a whistleblower. He's a rat, right? Which is bullshit. I hated that because in the NYPD, if you're a rat, you're like, that's worse than being a criminal, right? And then, look, nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop, period. So I'm not saying that cops like, but like I'd have guys come up to me, my boss, I think my boss plays golf on company time. It's like, okay, call the inspector general. What the fuck do you want me to do? It's like, now that I'm the rat, so I'm supposed to go rat everybody out. But it was weird. Like the other thing too is, I would see people in headquarters, right? And if I saw them in like the stairwell and nobody around, hey, Pete, good job. I like what you did when you testified. If they saw me in like a public place, it was like I had a radiation symbol around my neck. Right. So it wasn't until Tom Brandon, Tom Atterbury, and then later on, Holder appointed a guy named B. Todd Jones, former Marine attorney as well, former U.S. attorney from Minnesota. He came in and followed suit with Brandon and Atterbury. He was like, hey, man, as long as you're telling the truth, we're good. He was a Marine first, I guess, DOJ guy second. And so once people saw that those guys didn't hate my guts, then eventually I was like allowed to go back into the fold. But look, a lot of people in the field, to include a guy who I see logged in, Carlos Boxali, were solid, man. They were good people. Like the good agents of ATF were appalled by this. There was nobody in ATF saying, "Oh, like the working rank and file agent." They didn't know all the inner secrets of Fast and Furious, but they're furious about this because it went against the grain of everything we believe in. Everything.
Yeah, I love that.
And then we want to get Box out on this show.
Yes.
He actually came out to Dallas
Really?
before Pat Kelly's funeral.
Oh,
so
he's a good man. The first time I met Box was actually the takedown of the only dirty dealer that I ever ran into. Was Excalibur Arms in Phoenix. He was actually coaching cartel-related smugglers on how to avoid detection from ATF, what to say if they got pulled over. So we had this big takedown that the U.S. Attorney's Office declined, and we had to take it to the Arizona Attorney General's office. Terry Goddard himself actually showed up at the warrant execution, and he was very supportive. I don't know his politics, but I know as far as the way he treated us like gold. But yeah, Carlos came out for that press conference. So that's the first time I ever met Box. And then when I was in charge of ATF's Miami office, I used to see him all the time. Good man.
I was blessed that he came out. Can you pull in your book? I mean, I have it over there, but can you show the audience your book?
The #1 bestseller.
Yeah.
Well, it was #1 bestseller, new release. But here's what I learned. Politics happened then, and politics happen now. So I've had a couple of news organizations like really reach out and ask good questions, like OAN, which is a smaller news organization. Had me on for like a 15-minute piece. Couldn't have been nicer. Newsmax, Fox News, Sarah Carter did a little piece on it. She was great. Very, very, very into the border stuff. But I learned that like some of the news organizations on the other side, they won't talk about it because they think that I'm being political. If you read the book, you'll see I don't bring politics.
It's 100% unpolitical, but they politicize everything. And that's why this whole thing even about, and I love what you said, and I'm going to continue to repeat this over and over again. This isn't about gun manufacturers and stuff. This is about criminals. You guys aren't getting involved in any of that stuff. And it's how it all gets flipped on its head to go back to guns bad. And that part just irritates me to no end because it's like, that has nothing to do with any of
the
this.
Guns load the bullets in themselves. The guns pull that trigger themselves.
Well, here's the thing. There's over 300 million guns already in circulation, right? And they're not only in circulation in the United States. And there's a black market. It's an international black market, #1. #2 is with the advent of 3D printing, you can make your own gun.
Yeah,
it's not that difficult.
That's right.
So if you ban guns, the only people who will have guns are bad
the bad people.
Right.
That's
and
right.
Look,
it's always happened.
My question with this is, do you feel that it's opening up conversation again about Brian's death and that maybe the Terry family can get some peace? Or where do you feel your book is having the conversation? I mean, we're going backwards, and unfortunately, yes, the higher ups, the higher you go, the more political it goes. You were not political. The agents were not political. You're trying to get the bad people out. However, they made it political. So just sort of curious where you're seeing the conversations, if any of the senators, I mean, Trey and what was his name? The guy from California.
Issa?
Who? Issa, yeah. I mean,
he
he was very involved, but.
Well, he was the chairman of the Oversight Committee, so he was the one that had subpoena power. Grassley's office did not have subpoena power because he was only the ranking member of Judiciary. So he had to rely on Issa to issue subpoenas to have the hearings. But look, I where I'm hearing now, because I've been asked to appear on news a lot lately about the border. Yeah. I mean, look, the border, the cartels are much more violent now than they were then. When this was going on, CJNG was they were already there, but they were just becoming bigger, like they were growing. La Familia Michoacan, same thing. So, I mean, every now and then I'll get asked to come on and talk about the border. The fentanyl crisis, obviously, there's other people that can talk about that. Guys like Derek Maltz, who's intimately familiar with that. I'm more like weapons and whatnot like that, but the cartels have become a lot more violent. They're growing. For Brian, I've had some conversations via text and email with his brother, Kent, who's a great guy. Good guy. They're grateful that the book gave them some answers. I know they've been very supportive. And again, I wish I could give them all the answers. I just don't have all the answers. So it's tough because a lot hasn't changed. And look, with this lawsuit now, where Mexico is suing, the gun dealers, obviously, the book talks about why that's preposterous. And the book's been written for 2 years. It took a while to come out.
Right.
So it was pretty ironic to hear now out of nowhere they dropped this lawsuit where they're trying to allege that the dealers somehow knowingly participated in these schemes. That's asinine. Like I said, 90% of the cases that we got came from them. Roughly 90% of our cases that we presented for federal prosecution were declined for prosecution. So how is it the dealer's fault when you have federal prosecutors that won't do their job? You have aduana, which is Mexican customs, that's beholden to the plaza bosses, letting the shit come into their country. And look, I can't say I blame them. They're unarmed, right? And if they decide, hey, I am going to stop that car, screw that plaza boss, well, them and their family are probably going to get butchered. Right. So, but Mexico needs to clean up its own house before they start pointing fingers at us. That's what I think wholeheartedly, Well,
and that's why we need a border. Close that door, because when I have to fly in, I used to go to Mexico, living in Houston. I used to go over there at least once a month. And every time I would fly in, I would have to show my passport to come back into the country I was born in. Great. Same way as Canada. I'd have to fly, when I flew in from Asia, I had to show my passport. We need to clean up.
Ridiculous.
We're a nation of immigrants. But listen,
I get it.
But my grandparents, when they came here, they had to sit on Ellis Island until somebody figured out they didn't have tuberculosis or some other communicable disease, and they weren't criminals. They didn't just mosey on in and then demand like luxury accommodations, a cell phone, a debit card. It's asinine, and it's not sustainable where we're going right now.
Zero sustainability. And even the whole fact to even take it down to another level is you're opening this border after you told all of our citizens that you have to have this jab and you need multiple of these jabs. Let's leave the border open and allow all these people to come in that we have no idea where they are, where they came from, who they are, or if they've had a jab. Because I think that gets a lot of people too. But I mean, I'm with you. It is all about immigrants. My family originated in Germany, but they all came the right way. And I know a lot of immigrants that they're pissed about what's happening because they've worked so hard to get their to become an American citizen, and how proud they are. And they see their own nations that they fled. They're like, you guys don't see what's coming. This is not good. Like what is happening here. And it's go ahead.
Okay. All right. 2 things real quick. Number one is I know some folks who came here and migrated here legally. They went through the process, right? So they have to take that test to become naturalized citizens. And it's amazing how much they know about civics, how much they know about our country's history, right?
Yes.
So they have this appreciation for America. I spent 2 years, like I said before, up in Canada. And I used to spend a lot of time going out, hanging out with Canadian cops and Canadian soldiers. And we would mostly talk, but they knew my role up there was representative of the U.S. government. I was technically assigned to State Department as an ATF agent. And I used to sit there and listen to these folks. And sometimes I'd get invited to their houses and listen to their kids who knew so much about American history. And these folks would say, hey, man, Canada needs a strong America. You don't realize how much we rely on you folks. You're like, they looked at us almost like a big brother, and they were being sincere in saying this. So, I mean, here you have Canadians that know more about our country and its history. You have migrants coming here legally, right, who know more about our country and its history. And yet we have so many people that were born here, and some people I won't name names, that are in elected office now, who don't know our history, who don't care about our history, and who despise our country. So
I was going to say
my next door neighbor. Our next door neighbors are from Sri Lanka. Anyway, we were talking the other day, and they came over on a visa, and the company, they came over and they went through it. They are now U.S. citizens. And so when we were talking, they know more than I do. I mean, because they said it was a 4-year process. And what's interesting is that, our country, they're trying to erase all all history.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we can go down to that rabbit hole here. I mean, but for me, I was just asking them questions because I'm like, really? That's okay. Because again, I'm in my 60s. I don't remember school, but we don't remember things that these people are so passionate to come over and legally do it over the people that are coming over illegally because they're getting the free iPhones, they're getting the money, they're getting the house. I mean, New York's given up all these nice hotels where we have homeless people, we have unemployment, we have
schools
people
are closing to house them. I mean, it's insane.
I'll say this. As you know, I was a New York cop for a long time, and I do know that I go back to the 9/11 Memorial Museum a couple times a year, and I speak about, what I went through that day, and they give some leadership classes up there. And I'm grateful for that relationship. I think they do a great job of, memorializing that day in a dignified way. But I saw like what New York turned around in 1995 to 2000, 2001 era. I saw like what Times Square used to be a shithole.
Oh,
It turned
absolutely.
into a place where you could take your family. I usually stay down by the 9/11 Memorial Museum when I go there, like down by the federal courthouse, because it's close to Little Italy and it's close to Chinatown and the food is good. And I know where to get a nice ice cold beer pretty cheap without paying the tourist money, right?
Right.
But one time recently, about 4 months ago, I had to go there and something was happening in Lower Manhattan. So I wound up having to stay up by Times Square. It's turned into something that's worse than it was
Before
pre-Giuliani.
Giuliani.
Yeah, and to the point where, I saw somebody having diarrhea, like squatting against the building. In plain
Awesome.
view. People shooting up. A person dancing naked. The smell of marijuana everywhere. And I'm just saying to myself, like, what's wrong with New Yorkers that they're not voting to make sure that this? Because look, you get the government that you vote for. I hate to say it, and it blew my mind. But look, I did not have a firearm on me because I was working, and not for law enforcement purposes. And I'm not going to lie, I was afraid. I did not feel safe in that area, and
that's saying something.
Areas.
That's saying something when you are afraid like that. I
the
think,
city.
yeah. I mean, terrifying. I mean, and again, we could obviously go on and on because there's so many different avenues that I wanted to go, but this was a great conversation. And like I said, a great thing to be bringing up because it just, I did see you on another podcast following that article release too. But again,
Cam
just
Edwards, is that the Cam Edwards podcast?
Yes.
He's a great guy. I love Cam.
Yeah, that was good. But sort of as we wrap this conversation, do let people know where they can connect with you, get your book. Again, it makes a great Father's Day gift, people. And any final thoughts that you may have.
Oh, and then my question, are you going to put it on Audible with your voice?
It's out on Audible. No.
It is?
I would need a translator. They hired an actor to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to hear you say.
But no, hey, look, the book is available on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or any of those places. And then signed copies, you can only get through my website, which I never thought I'd have a website. My lovely wife helps me manage it. It's www.peterjforcelli.com. So I have some hardcovers and some bunch of soft covers in stock now. But with the hardcovers, they have to print them as so they're not like as available. Sometimes that can take a few weeks to get. But right now I have about 20 on hand. But yeah, and then I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I use that a lot for it's a professional platform. I find that, some of the other ones are a little too venomous. So I try to use it because most people keep it, professional on that website. So I'm on LinkedIn a lot. But yeah, so those are the ways. peterjforcelli.com or LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me.
Love it. Christy, any final thoughts, questions, or?
I'm digging into that book, but it brings back so many memories of what, the whole, and for the fact seeing the family and what they've gone through and what you all, you and John and everybody else, that you were fortunate that you did have people standing behind you.
Yeah, I don't forget that.
And when somebody says, don't do something, do it. Because the truth will always come out, and the truth is what's going to be strong if people wake up.
We asked about last words. My last words are this. There's only one thing you take to the grave with you, and that's your reputation. So do the right thing. That's what I try to abide by. That's what I was taught as a young cop.
You do.
Those are the words I try to live by.
Amen.
Well, and I agree with that, but also your character. People can try to destroy your reputation.
Yeah, you got to
They
defend it.
they can never touch your character.
True story. Love it.
I
Oh,
think we've all been there.
yeah. Oh, amen to that. So for everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. All the links that we've talked about, we will share in the comments as well as in the post promos. Do connect with Peter on LinkedIn. And again, now that I did forget about the signed books that you have on your website, so I apologize for that. Make it an extra special Father's Day. Get a signed copy. There's only 20, so put your order in today. And until next Tuesday at 1:11 p.m.
Or whatever time we decide.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, we wiggled today because it was 100% worth it. We wanted to have this conversation. And we just encourage people to go to our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, share all the things, ring our bell, get notifications, because we keep all of our videos there. And going forward, we'll probably be doing more with our YouTube channel. So do check that out. So until next week, maybe at 1:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, remember, we are all on this journey together. And together, we really do make it awesome. Have a great day, everyone.